from the Business Intelligence Group. We host all the awards programs, and we're here with some great guests today with Jason and Emily and Jamie and myself. And we're going to talk to you about making the AI and the humans work together. It seems to be the biggest problem that we have, and the biggest challenge we have right now is how are we dealing with all these AIs, and how are we dealing with those conversations that happen, start with AI and go into human, or start with human and go into AI. And so I've assembled this amazing panel of people to help us out, talk to us about it. The challenge is really pretty clear, I think. It is, just as I said, we can't lose those connections, right? Those connections between AIs and humans. When we're using that for customer experience, anything we're doing in the customer experience world, those sometimes are getting lost these days. And so we have our platform, our professor, and our practitioner here to help walk us through that. So first and foremost, my name is Russ Fordyce. Again, I host the business awards programs under the Business Intelligence Group, and we've been running the AI Excellence and the Excellence in Customer Service Awards for almost a decade. And so we've been seeing a lot of transition, especially with the advent of AI coming into the landscape and really changing the market in a significant way. So we've got Jason. Thank you, Jason, for joining. Jason is the go-to-market strategist for Verint. And if you don't know Verint, they're a pretty amazing platform for customer experience. They're evaluating all those calls and recordings into your call center and giving you updates on that. And Jason will show us through the platform and tell us what's new in AI and kind of where that's going. And then we have Emily, who is go-to-market and GM for Vertafore. And Emily's joining us at the last minute in favor of Rick, who had a last minute conflict. So thank you, Emily, for joining. We appreciate that. And Jamie at TELUS Digital. Jamie's putting all of this into action for her clients. They've launched, I think, 75,000 agents inside of their practice. And so she's going to tell us how to do this at scale. So I appreciate all of you joining. Thank you so much. This is going to be an interesting conversation. Jason, we're going to lead off to you. So why don't you give us a little bit of background about yourself and a little bit about Verint, and then we can get kind of started on the platform conversation.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so Jason Valdina, I work with a company called Verint. We're a global customer experience platform, customer experience automation, more specifically. And my background tends to be, for spending years in thinking about how customers interact with both automation. Now we just refer to it as AI, and humans, and how do those both come together in the same conversation. Spent a big part of my career following the emergence of different channels, extending from voice to SMS. If anybody remembers BlackBerry Pin, I was heavily involved in that, and then the growth of messaging and social media as a customer service channel. And luckily, those channels were some of the places where I got to view a lot of businesses really struggling with the challenge that we're discussing today, which is bringing conversational AI to those channels, and how to seamlessly escalate to an agent when they're needed. Yeah, great to
Well,
be here.
it's an interesting problem we face because there's a lot of, there's been a lot of automation and technology for a while, but and we've had new channels, like, as you've ridden that wave through SMS and through all the different BlackBerry channels and all the different methods that we have of getting communications. But this is a whole new beast. We have this whole new layer, this AI layer that's interacting with our data.
Right.
What do you think is the biggest common mistake that people kind of rush in, and when they're doing that first implementation, what's that mistake you see everybody make?
Well, yeah, I guess you set the stage talking about this idea of handover. So commonly we talk about handover as this moment where AI is interacting with you. We'll just talk to all of you. It's interacting with us, and then there's a moment where it's just not understanding what we're talking about, or we've prompted it to do something that it's not trained to handle, and it needs to go get somebody to help. And this moment of handover, as we talk about it as, I think the biggest mistake that I see businesses have made for quite a while and are still making it is that businesses will tend to think about conversational AI ending at that moment, that the moment of escalation to a person, that AI is completely out of the picture. But I think the conversational relationship between bots and people is really shifting. This was once a pretty linear relationship. A bot interacted with somebody, didn't understand something, or it's trained to say, "Don't answer this question. Get somebody on the line." Hand off to a human agent, and then the bot is completely out of the picture. I think the biggest thing is that context is really key, and I think when you all teed up this conversation a few weeks ago and started letting people know about it, and hopefully that's why everybody's here today. Context really is key, and I think the biggest mistake is that all too often that context that is so valuable, that a bot has gathered is completely lost at the moment that it goes through an agent. And the context has a lot of value in routing. When I say context, I'm saying bot. You've Let's just talk about us in our personal lives. We reach out to a business that we do business with. We converse with the bot through voice or a digital channel, and the things that we type or ask, or the options that we select, or the topics that we sort of bring up, all are context setting, including the number I dialed into, and what page on the website was I on, or what was I doing before this moment that I got escalated. Helps with routing and prioritization. Like, where should this conversation go? What human should get this conversation now, and why? Um, what kind of conversation is this? Is it a sales opportunity, or is it strictly service? It helps the person that's going to receive this conversation, the human that got handed over this conversation, to get up to speed faster and really understand the nature of what's going on.
And we've been collecting this data for so long, and anybody else feel free to jump in too. That's what I kind of scares me a little bit, and interested too, is that we've been collecting good data for a long time. I think Emily and I were both inside of major telecom operators,
Hmm.
and from a customer service perspective, we were collecting all sorts of data. We knew what calls you were making, what services you had, how often you called in. But for a human to translate all that data, um, it was mind numbing, right? I mean, it
Yeah,
had to make all these assumptions. But now you have, if you're treating this AI as almost like a human partner, um, it's doing all that stuff for you, and it already knows that customer. So it's got to be revolutionary.
that's right. And I think the library, if you would like, the types of information that could be added to that context is getting richer and richer and richer. So yeah, it is to a degree. It's mind-boggling to think about how much data that is that's been captured over time. But in the context of this moment where it goes from AI to a person, whether that's a salesperson or a customer service person, yeah, that context really has a huge amount of value. And I think the biggest mistake is that I think businesses are really undervaluing the importance of that context, or they're just not using technology that is going to allow them to actually harness that context and present it at the right time. Um, it's just invisible.
What does that context look like today? What's being handed back and forth?
Well, I mean, I think there's examples that let's take someone the most let's put voice off to the side for a moment, because voice is really interesting. I mean, there's things that could define context at the moment a call escalates, that have to do with phonics and just the nature of how I'm speaking. Do I sound pissed off or not? There's certainly things like that. What number did I call? What language am I speaking? So all these things are really important. The example I like to use though is like on web chat. It's kind of an old school experience that most of us have had at this point. You go to a website, there's a little chat widget, but you're on a web page, mobile or desktop, or maybe you're in an app. Like, what screen or page was I on? What was I looking at? Where did I scroll? What did I click on? So there's a whole piece of web analytics or app analytics that's really interesting, that used to be just mostly behavioral, but taking that in the context of saying, all right, now I got to give this to a person. I'm going to hand this to Emily, who's never had talked to me before. How does Emily know what's going on? So Jason was on this page. He spent 2 minutes on it. Then he clicked the help button. Then he did like understanding all that stuff. It's like, cool, got it. The other thing is, have you seen me before? Has Emily ever seen me before? Has anybody from her team ever spoken to me? Am I an existing customer, or am I totally unknown to the business? So I think all this stuff, it's all context, and it all helps. Who should see the conversation, and when they do see it, do they understand how to take action more quickly and be more efficient?
Yeah, it's interesting the way you talk about the routing, especially of handing that back off to the AI. You really
Yeah.
can start to determine. Again, Emily and I are used to kind of this escalation, and I'm sure it happens in
Hmm.
every business. But you have tier one, tier two, tier three, and it gets higher in kind of quality or knowledge as you get up the chain. And if you really have a problem, you could escalate from, from ring on the phone to tier 3 because you know the context of the call. So
Hmm.
that's I didn't even think about that. The routing alone is got to be transformational if you get it right.
It is. It's huge. I mean, and within Variant, like our platform sounds like a pitch, but one of the things we've spent a lot of time doing over the past like 5 or 6 years is continually fine tuning the way that we route, routing and queuing conversations up in the contact center to figure out where should that go, which team, which region, which team, which queue, and then maybe even sometimes which agent, based on a whole bunch of factors. Sometimes, we work with the Department of Education in New York City, and they have multilingual teams. So depending on what language someone's speaking when they call in, it goes to one of 9 teams that each speak one of the 9 languages they support. So little things like that. That's just a single example around language, but you start to stack these things, 4 or 5 of these contextual data points, you can get really accurate, and the customer experience is just going to be better for sure.
Now, it I think all of this is designed to make that customer experience better. It's also, to lower costs. I think, that's a good metric too. What are the metrics? And are there any new metrics that we need to keep our eye out for when we're talking about, this handoff or and all the I mean, you gotta be looking at all sorts of different metrics for AI versus human.
Yeah, I mean, are you asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I mean, I think there's like some standards, like, there's greatest hits that, I think a lot of us in the industry will talk about, and many on the call today will know, like, people talk about containment rate. So the ability for AI to contain a conversation, without needing to escalate to an agent. So, okay, that's something good to focus on. We have Valeris Airlines out of Mexico has an 85% containment rate. That's amazing. So that means 15% of conversations, of their total volume ever reach an agent. That's great. Doesn't tell the whole story, and I think average handling time doesn't tell the whole story. But like, I'll share 2 things here, I guess, to answer that question. One is, we did this study. This was like 6 years ago, but the fact that it's older, I think, makes it even cooler because it's still tried and true. Which is that we had a UK telecom company, who they did an A/B test. They had a team that just had interactions routed directly to them, and then they had another team that had conversations routed to them after a very simple bot interacted with them. The bot was really triage and context setting. It's just, what are you asking me about? Where are you from? Are you a customer? But it had questions that it would ask, and then it escalated to the agent. And they found that average handling time reduced by 22% just with that simple bit of bot, just because they got that context. But I think what the most interesting metric now that I think is emerging is thinking about attrition and retention. Thinking about employees, yes, uh, it's about the customer experience, but I do think there's an element of this that ends up being very much about the employees. So we're seeing, like, um, companies looking at the effect that AI has on employee attrition and retention because the conversations are more complex. When they do reach an agent, having that bot up front, if it's handed over now, there's something the bot couldn't do, and now that conversation just became exponentially more complicated, for that agent to handle. So, we've seen examples of where, attrition rates got higher when they introduced a bot because the
Right.
whole skill level just got more intense. So there's a lot to look at, but if I had to pick one, I think that employee, attrition and retention rates and how that relates to your usage of AI is really important to look at.
It is a good indicator, and I didn't mean to say, customer experience is the be all
No, no,
end all. Yeah, I mean,
customer
it's
experience is really important.
yeah, yeah, no, it is, and so is revenue, right? And
Yeah.
and everything does drive down to employees, right? So that's a good metric. Appreciate that perspective. Let's turn our attention now to putting this into practice. Um, Emily, welcome to the show.
Thank
Emily
you.
is general manager for wholesale and MG&A at Vertifor, and so you guys are in this very heavily regulated industry, but you kind of come from a background kind of like mine, more transactional, high volumes of transactions. Um, Now you're in this very regulated high transaction business. So, let's talk a little bit about that and what it's like to really kind of implement inside of a large organization. So, as you guys started to approach this, why don't you give us a little bit of background on how you kind of approached it, how you approached your AI implementation, and a little bit of background on Vertifor?
Great. Well, I'll start with just a little bit of background on Vertifor. So we're an insurance technology company, and we are trying to modernize, we are modernizing and simplifying and automating the entire insurance distribution channel. We focus on agents, carriers, and MGAs, and that's my specialty on MGAs. And I'll get into a little bit why MGAs and why it's really important as we talk about them with AI. They are very kind of considered like almost a niche specialist insurance provider. So they go into places or types of coverage that oftentimes larger carriers find, too risky or aren't as deep and knowledgeable about. So if you look at, and Russ, you spoke about my background, and I think the biggest difference that I've seen as I've started here is that we aren't necessarily using AI to make decisions. So if you look at kind of some of the stuff that Jason and you were talking about in some of my older companies, we would try and use AI to help make that decision in a call center, right? Where should this go? Can we answer this on behalf of, before it hits a human? How can we learn from it? Being in insurance, though, highly regulated, a lot of compliance issues. So right now, we are using it to try and optimize the decisions that a human needs to make. So we're looking at kind of intake and pattern recognition and providing summaries, reducing handoffs to get to the decision maker faster. So think about the underwriter, right? The underwriter is the one that is kind of assessing the risk of any policy. And we kind of look at that workflow and go, how do we get the right data the fastest to the underwriter so he or she can make the right decision? And along that channel, there was a lot of manual handoffs, and we have this, really optimized preparing the experts, but not driving the decisions because we got to be careful with the regulation.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot from a lot of the banking platforms too, the loan and banking platforms. It's this highly regulated, very manually intensive, often as we all know, very still paper and fax, believe it or
Yeah.
not, and for good reason, right? Those systems were put into place for security and other reasons, but it introduces a whole new AI introduces a whole new way of doing things, but you still have to go after and be compliant with all those regulatory constraints. So how
Yeah.
is that a little bit different as you go into implementing this? How are you staying within those guidelines, even to do, kind of to shorten that cycle and to shorten that task length?
We are, we're going through and looking at, if you look at the kind of insurance distribution channel, you have agents and they can be submitting all different types of applications with all different types of data. So we're really looking to AI to consolidate it and summarize it. And one of my earlier points was on kind of MGAs, and I look at kind of, let's say, climate risk in certain areas. It is changing so fast that how they rated, policies for fire risk 10 years ago is completely different. And it could be different across the street from each other. And those are things that you really need right now an expert to be in and go, what needs to change? We can't rely on those decisions being made by AI yet. But how do we go through the applications, making sure it's flagging when data is missing, pulling that in, making sure it's flagging when key critical pieces of information that the underwriter might need is missing, pulling that in. So again, he or she can make those really fast. And when you look at that, it's, one of the biggest, I'd say, surprises is that we had to start with the workflow before we started the AI, right? We started putting in AI in certain areas, and then, are we seeing the benefit, or is this really helping? And have we optimized the kind of the end-to-end workflow yet? And that is where we really needed to kind of take a step back and go workflow design first how do we want this distribution channel, to work? What do we need the underwriters to see, right? How do we optimize them? And then let's go kind of piece by piece and go, this is where we should use AI, this is where we shouldn't, and put some guardrails around each of those.
That is such a great piece of advice. In my world, we have a lot of automations and it's very process driven. And in a lot of businesses, especially small businesses, I'm not sure those are written down. Uh, and so you do need to go through this process of, okay, if I'm going to implement this thing, you just can't have, free reign of my customer journey or whatever experience that you're going after. You really do need to kind of piece it together and say, okay, here's that process. Where in this process would AI fit and make sense?
Right, exactly. We had to go and speak to a lot of our customers, from individual agents to huge carriers, to identify their pain points that could be different carrier by carrier, right? They have different pain points. They develop different internal tools, all to get the same kind of outcome and make sure they're compliant and they are in the regulatory guardrails. But without doing that work first, to go, we can assume from our end what the pain points are. But where is those swivel chairs? Where is it really wasting time, or where are providers on that not getting the right information? So that was something that we really had to do, that as we started AI, that we didn't necessarily think about right away.
So I think once you have that kind of process optimized,
Mhm.
you now have that underwriter kind of sitting there with optimized information. In theory, he's got, that call sheet or the detail sheet that used to take him 3 months to put together now is done in, 3 weeks or 3 days, 3 hours pretty soon. Um,
Correct.
the capacity of transactions that underwriter's going to be able to do, it has to go up. So how do we get to that next step to where that underwriter is still, kind of that human check mark, but the capacity of that person, is doubled or tripled?
And that's exactly what our kind of solutions are trying to do. Nothing is replacing humans in the workflow. We haven't seen that yet. We're trying to optimize, right? How many policies are they able to review a day, um, a year ago versus today? And that's our metric of success. And much more efficient can they be? Because, like you mentioned, and whether it's in the finance industry or this, there was a lot of swivel chair. We just found, with so many different ways that people get data, and you can have two carriers that get the same data, but one likes it this way and the word's over here. So using AI to go, you don't have to figure out where to put it in your application. We're going to take it and enter it in the right spot for you. But there's 10 minutes of human time gone. An underwriter does not have to go back, because this was their biggest pain point. I just want to do my job. I want to look at this risk. I don't want to go, wait, this doesn't make sense. This isn't right.
Right.
Swivel it back, send it back. And so that's what we're trying to do. And that's how we're really working with our customers to say, how much more efficient can you be? Insurance is all kinds of, niche insurance is exploding right now. So we want to set them up for success, by optimizing their workflow process.
So if I'm in a regulated industry, a different industry, and I'm a smaller business, how would you recommend that they kind of get started?
Start with the low risk workflows. Like, that's kind of table stakes. You have to really look at, where we want to start. Submissions is where we feel very confident. These are applications. It's asking for birth date, names, and all that. That's where we're really starting. It's low risk. If there's a data, you can go back and quickly update someone's middle name, right?
Right.
Or update this, or okay, you need to validate a few extra things. When you start to get into kind of, so that's an intake and summarization is where we want to start. Again, we want to really shy away from decision making, um, uh, at the outset. And then, as I go back to the workflows, is you have to be really intentional about where you insert those human checkpoints. And that's another thing that I think we're working with our customers on, is not just, let's just stick an AI and see what happens. Let's really be intentional with, we need a human checkpoint here and this is what it looks like. We need a human checkpoint here and this is what it looks like, because the models and the data is growing every day. We want to make sure it's accurate, as things like, different risks are changing all the time, or new risks are emerging. And then you want to really look at the operating model first, and then the tool second. The tool is, really look at your operating model. AI is the tool. AI is not the operating model. And that's something that I see, especially smaller companies, they go AI first. That's what they're thinking. Okay, how do I use AI? We say, wait, pause. What's your operating model? Where do you want your team of people to be focused on, and then build AI around it?
Well, interesting in practice, especially in regulated industries. I think it'll be it'll be interesting to see when we can really start to take that next level. Because I always use the example of the radiologists. We all thought radiologists were going to go out of business as soon as
Right.
AI came in, because you know AI can read a screen better than anybody. But what's happened is there's a huge now shortage of radiologists because we can do more radiology. Because, all
Exactly.
that task work that you're talking about is done, and the
Yep.
radiologist can come in, check work, yes, no, whatever. And now there's a shortage. So, I see the same thing happening. There's definitely going to be a shift in labor, but there's definitely going to be humans involved, and a lot of these practices we're going to need more of these people.
Yeah. And I'd say, just as a final, it's not just about making the companies more efficient. When you do that in the insurance industry, you're actually providing, I believe, much better value to the end customer, right? Because now we are just getting smarter at, you don't have to take on, we're not kind of, they're able to not peanut butter spread risks as much. And we can start to get way more tactical about assigning risks. And that can be really beneficial to the end insured, as they are trying to, get coverage for all different kinds of personal and business needs.
Yeah, and as you said, the more niche you go, it's harder to evaluate that stuff, and now you've got a new tool to do that. So, Emily, thank you for that. We're going to move on to putting all of this into practice at scale, and we're talking huge scale. So, Jamie is from TELUS Digital. If you don't know TELUS, they're one of the biggest brands in Canada. Think of Verizon. This is their digital arm, I think is the way it was described to me. So, Jamie, introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background about TELUS Digital.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Jamie Timm. As Russ mentioned, from TELUS Digital. TELUS Digital is part of TELUS, and we serve our customers across the customer journey. So whether that is helping with digital channels, so webs, apps, marketing campaigns with acquisition or service through human and AI, or in retention and expansion activities, we service across that customer journey. And one of the exciting things for me in the conversation today is we've had the opportunity to look at AI across that CX part of our business, but also as a part of our professional services arm that does technical implementations, where we help folks use platforms like Jason's companies and many others. So we had the opportunity to kind of see it from the service provider standpoint as well as the end user, with many of our employees and team members being the beneficiary of these AI solutions. Another interesting aspect of the business is that we have an arm of our business that really works on the model applicability. So at the core of all AI really is data, right? Anon says in the chat, knowledge bases and how we're thinking about having the right content, or I'll say data, for AI agents to serve. That's really at the heart of the opportunity here. And so we have teams that create bespoke data sets and train models to be more effective, as well as do the application side of that. So this AI revolution is really interesting for us because it touches so many different aspects of the business. Um, so excited to be here with y'all today.
Yeah. Well, I think I was astounded by the scale at which you guys are already operating. Yeah, I did a little bit of research. I know you guys have won a few awards for all your work in AI and in all that work. Tell us a little bit about how it's working inside of TELUS, and then kind of maybe a few examples of kind of that handoff and that CX experience that you're building for your customers as well.
Yeah. So a few years ago, when generative AI became all the rage, we made a choice that we weren't going to put our heads in the sand and see how things went, but we were going to experiment. But trust by design was going to be part of the way that we enabled all of our team members globally to be able to use these tools. And so we made some investments early on in a platform that had trust and security built into it, so that we could be confident that as we enable these tools with our teams, that we weren't training public models and we were doing things in a safe and secure way. Because of that, we've been um, you know, well over 70,000 different AI solutions across the business, as well as support our 80,000 team members worldwide that do CX for hundreds of customers. And it's been a learning journey for sure. Just the last 2 weeks, I think, have shown us how quickly this space changes. So for any of you in the software development space, the last 2 weeks, I think, have been quite an interesting time to look at how that space could potentially evolve with, you know, autonomous agents doing many activities. And we won't go down that rabbit hole, but I think it's an interesting kind of exposure to what's possible. But I think having that backbone of the security by design and the way that we've thought about the implementation, it's really allowed us to go from experimentation within many of our different business units into scaling things that are working. And we've saved hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of AI implementation across the business. I'll talk about a few examples specific to the CX space. We saw a really big opportunity around training early on for our global team members who do CX for customers. Customer requirements around training can often mean that training and nesting time can be anywhere from a month to several months before an agent can be on the floor taking interactions. And we saw an opportunity with synthetic conversations, both chat and voice, to help those team members train kind of in a virtual environment and one that is proximate to what real life is like. And we've seen a 50% reduction in time to, on floor post nesting time and increases in efficacy, both around things like first call resolution, but also for many of our customers, also increases in sales conversion, which is really interesting as we think about how Jason was talking about how CX will evolve in this world that we're living in with more complex interactions handled by humans. The other trend that we see is those folks also handling retention and growth opportunities for customers. And what does it look like to, help a body of team members prepare for that new reality in addition to the service aspect? Because oftentimes those things go hand in hand, right? And so we're thinking about what the composition of training and recruiting looks like for folks in that higher complexity world, and also preparing our team members to be able to think about AI as a tool in their toolbox and not something that they should be scared of. And I think that mentality really positions us well as we look at what the next, several years look like in the CX industry, which is expected to have, increasing spend from a technology standpoint as we transform the way CX works, and a change of that composition and cost to serve to be more technology oriented. And so we want our human team members to be excited about that opportunity, to see it as an opportunity, and for us to invest in their training and capability so that they're able to make that transition for where the industry is going.
Yeah, and I always fear people thinking my job's going to go away. You're outsourcing my job. If you efficiency me to death, I'm gone. And it's really not that. There's going to be jobs that shift. I think more than anything is we need more of those human interactions. We're going to have to, train these bots. We're going to have to do all of this stuff. So humans are definitely still in the workforce, and you're still seeing it, and they're helping us get better. I mean, in this amazing agentic AI world, if we solved customer service, we all got on Jason's platform and you built us 75,000 agents of our own, we'd still have problems that needed humans to solve, and the agents are going to mess up and everything else. And as we've seen in these regulated environments, there's bounds to what we want them to do and what we can do. So it's interesting you talk about the training of it, and that are you, when you're talking to your clients, kind of, I ask you similar to Jason, are you seeing different metrics start to come up in those conversations as you deploy these? Is it beyond
Yeah.
that containment rate?
Absolutely. I think we want to look at things like high value time on the call and instead of average handle time, right? Because as Jason mentioned, higher complexity is actually going to drive HT up. I think that's an expectation we should all have, and we should start, working toward resetting kind of foundational expectations around. As a part of that, though, we have to really deconstruct the call and ask ourselves, how much customer effort was expended as a part of that? How did we resolve that on the other side? And did we use part of that call to bridge to a sale or help, with service attainment in terms of retention. I think all those things we would deem, if we listened to the call, as being successful. And, platforms like Jason's, as they're thinking about, quality management and the assessment of sentiment, but also what does good look like, I think are the foundation for the evolution of a lot of these metrics, right? Because it's not just purely about time. It's about how that time was spent and how does the customer feel as a part of that and how much effort did they have to expend. So, we're talking about some of these challenges that can happen between, the AI and humans. When a customer has to start over from the interaction with a web chat, as Jason mentioned, and then into talking to a person, or then maybe they get transferred to somebody else, that's a high effort interaction, right? And I think we want to look at those kinds of frictions as a measure of success as well. If we can bring the context, like Jason said, of what that customer was doing on the web property and why they called last time and where they are maybe in their billing cycle and what are the other things happening with their account forward. This gets to Anand's point in the chat. It's not just about knowledge, but it's about what we know about that customer and how we can start to hedge on what they might be calling about so that we don't have to ask them 20 questions. We can start to anticipate what some of those things are. And that's when the magic really happens, I think, from a customer service standpoint.
But the way you put it just expanded my mind a little bit because I went through a process in customer service. It was a Six Sigma effort to bring efficiency into the organization, and one was around um, basically solution selling and upselling within the customer service channel. And we spent a lot of time and effort building this very complex matrix of if they call in for this, then they might want this, and you might try to sell them this, and then you had to build pitches around that, and then you had to train people.
Yeah.
And I imagine now, especially in the insurance markets and telecom markets and the technology markets, a lot of these portfolios that you have are so complex and so deep in terms of product that they might be a customer might be sold one thing and they might have a better result with another. And I imagine those customer conversations that they have, AI is going to start helping to draw that out, and that complex portfolio of products really becomes whoever that agent is, whether it's AI or human, really becomes kind of more solution oriented and able to kind of dig in and solve some customer problems with even different product.
Yeah, that's dead on. And the other thing I would add is, in previous installations, I think of CX, it's hard to get the coverage in terms of what's happened on a call and what good looks like and how do you scale those learnings. That institutional knowledge that never really gets documented. Now with, the tools that we have in terms of AQM solutions and transcription solutions, we have the ability to do much more robust analytical work, both on what's working and then turn that into assistive tools to be able to help bring up all the quartiles of agents to your top tier, right? So everybody's operating like your best agent. And then on the basis of that, be able to bring those things further left in the process to help the AI be more productive. And that's a virtuous loop, right? It's not a one-time evaluation and coach the team member cycle, though that's very important. It really needs to feed all the way upstream into your self-service channels, right? So we look at call avoidance and, you know, optimization of self-service as a part of what's happening downstream, but also then how do we help with the AI bot in terms of containment? And when we get to the human, how do we make that human the best prepared to handle that interaction based on all the other interactions that people that are servicing that that customer base has and what worked, right? That that used to be, this panacea that wasn't possible just because the processing of data would take too long, the analytics would take too long, and then being able to put it into a generative way so that it can be applicable to the people that we're talking about, it just wasn't possible. I think one of the really exciting things about AI is, and especially where we are in terms of some of the cost to do this kind of coming down, is it's actually going to allow us more customers in a better way. Just like what we saw with, the advent of open source software, right? There's a lot of people that said, oh, this is going to kill software development, just like people are saying that about software development today. Well, maybe decades from now that's true, or 5 years from now that's true. But in the meantime, we're going to build more software. We're going to service more customers because we can do more of that than we've been able to. And I think that's the important part. I think for us to talk about with our teams. I read a really great article the other day that said that companies that think about transformation and innovation are going to take the time that's available and they're going to use that to fuel where they're going next. And companies that are looking to control their shrinkage over time are going to use that to cut. And I think there's a really interesting kind of thought dynamic for us as leaders of what are we doing with that available time and how are we using that to expand and improve on the CX experience for customers or in the insurance experience with the way that we handle agents. We have choices with what we do with that time. We could give it back to the bottom line, or we can invest it in something that creates more leverage that actually returns more to the bottom line. And I think that's the challenge for all of us that makes this beyond a cost efficiency play, but really into a transformational opportunity.
Well, and I would imagine most boards these days are looking at that. They're looking at not how can we cut workforce, but how can we accelerate that workforce and make them, 10 times as efficient. Let's
Yeah.
service more customers. Let's sell more customers. Let's build new product. Let's build new software. It's software development's not going away because I'm a software developer all of a sudden. We're all software
That's right.
developers now.
That's right.
Well, I mean, that's what my team is. We develop software, and I have a backlog of really great stuff that we want to get through. And we launched kind of Code Assist on the hundreds of software developers we have, and how can we get better output? How can we be more efficient? And we really started that in the last, couple months, and we're seeing really great tools and learning a lot about how to utilize it for software development in a smart way.
Absolutely.
And I know everything's going perfectly well. I know all of my agents and AI work is just stellar. It never lies to me. It never takes me in a direction, never gives me a wrong number often. Um, we've talked about all the good, right? Let's talk about some of the reality of, it doesn't always go well. And I think, as we were talking earlier, the process, really mapping out your process and really defining kind of the goals and the outcomes that you want is probably step number one for not making all these mistakes. If I had any advice, because I tend to go into things a little haywire and think it can do a little bit more than it can. Let's talk a little bit about that. Anybody have any examples of kind of where it went wrong and where you had to pull back a little bit? Any failed pilots,
Well,
Jason?
I was just going to kind of what I just talked about when we did the software development and putting in Code Assist. We kind of started it a little bit like everyone try it, everyone use it. And kind of what I said, as I'm looking at my customers saying, really define your workflows and optimize the process. I found that I really needed to go to people and define for them, this is what it's responsible for versus this is what you're still responsible for. And really teaching them more methodically how to use it, how it's supposed to be leveraged, and let's take a pause instead of everyone just try it, right? Everyone just start, right? That was where some people really took to it, and some people were like, I don't know, I don't like it. And so we've been really pivoting, getting some SMEs, taking a step back, and being really intentional about how we kind of implement it into our software kind of design.
Yeah, I think my last corporate job, I think it was a few years ago, but the method there was everybody was on halt. Everybody was scared of putting it into action, and I fear that there's still a lot of businesses that are still fearful and kind of trying to keep their bounds on it. But you know, I think as you all mentioned, this isn't about kind of running away from something. This isn't the new computer in the living room where everybody's a little bit scared of it. um, we've got to adopt this stuff and we've got to start bringing it in and doing it. So I think it's an interesting time for everybody. Um, when you think about rolling stuff out, and this goes to kind of each of you, I guess, Jason, I'll start to you as one of the big vendors in this, and Vertifor, uh, Emily, with you is when you're talking with these customers, how are you laying out kind of their roadmap to success so we can avoid some of these things, so we can avoid the mistakes and give them timelines that are actually reasonable?
Well, I think a lot of what doesn't work is when businesses don't think about approaching their customers in a holistic way. And so, I think there's been what we've seen is a lot of different departments across a business doing their own little experiments and competing with each other for budget and resources and exec attention. And they're competing with each other. And not only do those projects end up being kind of myopic and focused on a slice of the business, it ends up not contributing to that holistic approach for the customer. So we see a lot of businesses say, well, we're just going to do this one little experiment around this one little thing for this one little department. And then customers reach out to that business and they don't care about departments or which group does what.
Mm-mm.
They see the brand. And so they reach out to the brand through some channel and some conversational AI that was put out there as some experiment by some department. And the only thing that could be done or accomplished with that bot is something that is near and dear to that department's goals. And so that, I think that approach has proven to not work. I think
It,
the successful leaders are really approaching this arduous task of aligning their organization around AI investment and implementation that says, this is what customers want from us. Let's go to the basics. What do we do as a business? What are the things that, what are the commonalities across, no matter what department you're in? What are the things that everybody's asking us about? And let's approach those holistically, bringing the domain expertise and the data and the maybe the backend applications and all the things that those different departments bring to the table, but they're contributing to some bigger thing. The problem with this is that in the past, what also doesn't work is taking 2 years to launch that stuff. So I think we've heard terrible stories from a couple of years ago, brands working for 2.5 years to launch something. By the time they launched it, all the policies that this bot was espousing about and everything about the business had changed. So the bot was completely wrong. That's not happening as much anymore. That was a very fixed, kind of a fixed in stone logic bot that, now are people using, content sources that could be updated on the fly. And, there's a question about using knowledge content as part of your bot build. So I think that's changing a lot. Gen AI is obviously helping a lot too. But the just because you're taking a holistic approach does not mean that timelines have to be years. This should still be weeks to experiment, get something out there, see if it matches what the customer expectation is, and move from there. But I think that where I'm seeing success, or where Varen is seeing success with customers, it's the customers who either come to the table with this already in hand, or they take our advice to say, I know that like we have a global insurance company. Actually, it's funny that where Emily's here. Global consumer insurance company who their sales team in a specific country. I won't say where they are, but like a specific regional sales team is like, hey, we want to use Barrett stuff for this. So they went to the contact center and said, could we use your stuff for this other thing? And what was cool about that was they started from a good place, which was the contact centers are already using like certain processes and certain software. Maybe we could kind of glom onto that. But when we started those conversations, they had wildly disparate senses of like the customer journey and where they should be inserting themselves, and the expectation that the contact center could be salespeople. I mean, all these kind of things. It's a great problem to solve, but their head was in the right place. So what we're seeing is that the success comes when these businesses think holistically about how they approach the customer with AI.
yeah. Now, Jamie, you've deployed this probably more than any of us at this point. What is when you go to that new CAIO, if that's his title or her title, or the CIO or the CEO? What sort of timelines are you telling them? What are you giving them in terms of kind of when they're going to see stuff pay off?
Yeah, I mean, I really have a belief that within a 2-month period, we can have something working that starts to deliver value. And I think just to draw a really refined point off of what Jason was mentioning, it's not about starting small that's the problem, right? It's about those things being disconnected. And I think the
Hmm.
important part with AI is start small, find success, build, scale from there. One of the things that we're really seeing success on is this concept of putting our AI engineers next to the people that we're building the solution for. So we have really tight cycles of looking at what's the opportunity, how are we going to solve it, did it work? And you can almost run a daily cycle on that and look at the business results and then continue to scale. And we've seen that very close proximity of the AI engineer to the recipient of that solution be very successful, not just in it creating great impact, but also in the change management aspects of what we're talking about. Because the recipient of that tool, in this case, one of our CX team members or one of our Qs, has the opportunity to co create with that engineer and help influence what's going to help them with their job. Did it work? Did you like it? Why didn't it work? Why wasn't it helpful? Did it add more friction here? How would you like to see it different? And the team, like we were talking about, software development has such a rapid cycle now. You can make those changes so quickly and in a production ready way that has all of the markings of something that has quality around it. And with tools around testing those co-pilots, we have a proprietary system that's called Fortify that allows for that security testing around these things too, because we've all seen the headlines around bots that have gone rogue and said disparaging things or inappropriate things that reflect your wrong way. It's important that that becomes an automated part of the way that you build and check these things as well. But in my mind, you can drive value in a very short period of time, especially if we're putting the people together and we have the business data. But, I keep going back to my friend and on the chat because I think the question is just so important is if the data and the knowledge isn't accessible, and the people using it know it because they've worked in the company for 20 years, but there is no factual source of truth. Your AI is not going to be able to pick that out of the ether automatically. Like, sure, there are ways for us to create that over time by listening to calls and doing transcription, but your data source is so much more important than it ever has been. And I think that knowledge base so much more critical because if that's in a good spot, you can continue to build from it. And if it's not, that becomes a part of the process that you build alongside with the solution that you're building to be able to inform it and make it better. And that institutional knowledge that I mentioned, that undocumented knowledge, is a critical effort that everybody should have, some combination of AI tooling and a chief librarian on because
Yeah.
it is lifeblood of all of your organizational activity from here on out.
Yeah, knowledge
To-
is definitely having a moment. We have like Varen has a huge business around knowledge management. So we have a lot of customers that have this sort of a fixed perception of their organizational knowledge that they wrote this thing and it's good for 2 years and I don't need to look at it again. And they're starting to see, sure, that's great that they can leverage that content to generate responses on the fly, to customer or even employee inquiries. But yeah, I think what's really cool now is there's the organizational knowledge and then there's the customer knowledge, the knowledge of about your customer in this moment context that we're talking about, bringing those things together. I'm not seeing too many businesses really do this well yet, but like taking the content that they've written that they want to be projected outward, and then the content that they're getting by interacting with customers and saying, what wins? How does AI sort of prioritize these topics or these data points?
yeah.
It's interesting to think about how those things balance.
Well, data is the new lifeblood. I mean, and look in every system you can and export that data or get an API in because that is absolutely your lifeblood now. Emily, as you go into a customer kind of interaction, what's the biggest bottleneck that kind of stops them from seeing success?
Um, I'd say, the biggest one, and we call it like decision latency. So we've made this part of your workflow way more efficient. So in my previous example, submissions to underwriters, right? We're going to have a lot more a day. Once it hits that underwriter, do the downstream, are they all the governance after that? Are they ready to start getting that? Like and making decisions faster? The accounting folks, right? The financial folks, are they prepared for the increase in productivity that we've set up over here? So it's not necessarily in the AI tool there's a bottleneck or how we're using AI, but it's really the downstream kind of workflow. And that's why I keep going back to you don't need to even optimize like here's the part of the process we're going to use AI. That's not what needs to be optimized. It's end to end. Now that we're going to see a 20% increase in how daily submissions, right? We're going to have this is going to happen. Are we now, for everyone else, do we have everything set up to absorb that? And so that's how we are really kind of coaching our customers to make sure as we are getting these new tools out to them.
I see it all day, and even in my own practice, and you guys might as well. Is I have so many ideas that I can now go execute on. You're like, oh, I could do this. And then you try to go execute on it, and you're like, well, there's this other thing I could go execute on. And because you have all this intelligence capacity and agents that could go work for you, you're almost limited by your own capacity of what you can do. And so, stepping back and really going, what should I do? Where
Mhm.
where should I fit this? the world is your oyster right now. If you want to become the next Salesforce, you could tomorrow, right? But it's where can you leverage it the best, that I think you guys have hit on that note the most. We do have a couple of questions. I just want to thank all of you for joining, and thanking all of our hosts, Emily and Jason and Jamie, for joining us. We did have a couple of questions in the chat, so let's go through those. If anybody has questions for the guests or me or anybody, you can throw it into the Q&A, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. So um, this one comes from Anand again. How are you thinking about the health sustainability of self-service knowledge bases and having the right content for agents to serve? For example, text is not as good as video. Knowledge bases are not kept up to date. Anybody want to tackle that one?
I think I mentioned a few minutes ago, but I think it's not a one and done process. And Jason mentioned the same thing. It's an ongoing evolution of how you put that in context of that particular customer and what's working. And so knowledge isn't just a reference point. I think that knowledge and context for the agent, or the human agent, or the digital agent, um, it's not static. How that gets activated and presented to the customer. And I think we have a lot of work to do, I think, as an industry, on the core knowledge piece. And then at the same time, on how that's presented in context for the customer. Because those two things are very far apart today, and they need to start to come together to be able to provide a much more human like, I think, agentic experience that really answers what the customer has done the interaction, the outreach for. Otherwise, it's like a virtual FAQ, and that's not really what people are after when they're reaching out in these channels, right? They're looking for a lot more depth, a lot more substance in that.
Well, there
Yeah,
was this
and
comment about the chief librarian. Russ, did you say that? I missed who said
no,
that.
I think
Was that
somebody
Jamie?
else did. Yeah, Jamie said
Okay.
that, I think.
Because I like that concept too. I think to answer Anand's question, there like one thing that the Verint platform does really well, that I think is interesting, is it allows, in the context of knowledge, honestly, and even Copilot. So we have an agent Copilot. Agents can say whether they can thumb up and thumb down guidance that they get in real time. So it'll say like, you should tell Russ this. The agent can be like, nope, that was totally off. Now, one would think nothing happens to that, but if the most common thing that we do with it, that our customers do with it, is if they get a thumbs down, there's data that says what were the content and knowledge sources for that recommendation to the agent. I don't know which one was wrong, but if there were 4 sources that were used by Gen AI to craft this pithy sentence or two, something's wrong with these articles. The owners of those articles get notified that there was agent feedback, and how many agent, 17 agents in the past week have said this is wrong. So one of those articles has to be contributing to that. We could do better than that, but like at least there's a feedback loop between the people who are receiving this stuff, who may or may not know any better. But when they do know better, they're able to say, that's wrong. I can't use that guidance. Someone fix that because I'm busy. And then
Yeah,
people who are the librarians will be like, oh, wow, I got this queue of stuff that is inaccurate. I'm going to go chase Russ, and I'm going to chase Emily and Jamie, who are like the authors of these pieces, and say, is this still the right stuff? Now, that it's still a little bit old school, but we understand that a lot of businesses still operate that way. So having this feedback loop at least helps the business catch up to how much these things evolve.
And you
yeah,
can see
and
how that continue to evolve just really quick, Russ. Like if we think about Jason's platform, so we're scoring those calls. We know what the agent actually said. Let's say that they converted and did everything that they needed to do, and that was a great success. Now we can use the transcript as a part of how we fuel that knowledge ongoing when they consider how they might evolve that article, right? Instead of it, stopping at the thumbs up, thumbs down, which is a great advancement from what a lot of folks have today. Even continuing through what Jason's platform affords, like we can look at, did it actually work, and should we be considering that institutional knowledge that the agent used as a part of our knowledge base? And that is how we start to chip away at this, I think, glacier underneath the water of institutional knowledge versus what's actually in the knowledge base. Because otherwise it's an overwhelming, I think, effort for a lot of companies for how do you do that improvement? How do you keep it going? We have to use that loop of information that we already have to be able to fuel it.
It reminds me of when companies were outsourcing customer service. A lot of them didn't have these processes. Their institutional knowledge was locked away in 3 or 4 people, and, everything would get escalated to 3 or 4 people. And once they got that out, it the lights went on, right? And everybody shared in that knowledge. And Jamie, I think you were talking about this. The customer's use of our products changes, and so how they use our products changes, what they're doing with our products changes. And so all of that intelligence about how to support them has to change with that, with the new use cases. And that's part, boy, for a lot of you, that's got to be a real trick. Let's go a couple more questions here. We have one from Hema. As AI handles more of the initial interaction, how do you ensure the handoff to human agents gets preserved, not just context, but the also intent and customer sentiment, and how you measure whether the transition was truly successful? Anybody want to take that one? Jason, it sounds like that's up your alley.
Yeah, the one thing I would chime in on is like the last piece of like how do you know whether that handover was successful? There's one simple I mean it's not a simple question to answer, but there's one simple thing that comes to mind that I know we recommend to customers to look at, which is how many segments of an interaction do there end up being? So if you let's say on average around a specific topic or even in mass, like our contact center tends to have 2.4 agents involved in an interaction, right? Because it you went from one department to another, and then maybe a supervisor got involved or whatever. Looking at how many legs of an interaction exist by average or by topic or even by language or region, you could slice and dice it any way you want. Is that number going down? Because I think if you can actually get the right agent at the right time with the right information, anybody in the contact center should be the right person at the right time, right? So if you're doing something right, that number should be going down. How many people touch that customer conversation on average? So could it go from 2.4 to 1.5 or 1?
Yeah.
It's not going to go to less than 1, but being
Well,
able to reduce that.
with AI interaction, maybe it does, right?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Maybe with your containment. Uh,
If it never escalates, then yeah, that's the other piece too. But I think knowing whether handover was successful is a good question to ask. And my only answer that I can think of right now is I think we talk about it as like legs. How many legs of the call or the interaction? So reducing the legs.
Well, I like what you say. Everybody becomes the right agent. But we talked about earlier too is, with the context of the call, you could literally place that person with the right agent, right? You could
Hmm.
say,
Yeah, it
"Oh,
goes both ways. Yeah.
yeah, yeah." It's very interesting. All right, one more question, and then we'll get on our way. Again, from a nod similar to Hema, I've heard of when people drop off AI chats and there's no handoff. What is the best way to measure success? This kind of goes deep into presentation of AI too. And that's something I wanted to bring up of let's not, try to trick our consumers that this is a human anymore. Let's, be upfront about the AI and what the intent is. I think Emily, you probably experience a lot of this with, you're looking for transactional data. You're not looking for, strategy. You're looking to help the underwriters. Let's give that information to the consumer to say, hey, we're bringing AI into this, but here's how this AI is going to help. Are you guys seeing that from your customers, kind of more transparency?
I mean, we are definitely, and I think customers want it, right? As if you look back a couple years ago, and Jason and Jamie can probably speak about this as well. Was how do we hide it? I remember when I was at Lumen several years. This was 8 years ago. We were trying to install customer sentiment and chatbots, but trying to hide it. And because I think it was so new and the results were still a little unknown, so we didn't want people as we were trying to get them in there and how do we make that seamless. Now I think the consumers and everyone in the workflow is way more open to that, and they see the value in everyday life, not only for business but in personal life. So I think they are starting to get to that point where they know that I might actually be able to get a better, faster answer if I go this channel first. And but then we all have to set up what happens if I don't and make that transition seamless. But we're saying, come send this through the email for agents, use our tool because it's going to be AI, and we're going to, put some guardrails in place to catch anything that may be off. And they're very open to that. And I think our customers and then their end customers as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to this new improved customer world where these handoffs are very smooth and we're not, or where we get to the perfect world in Jason's world where no humans interact with us and agents carry everything. But no, I'm just kidding. Jason, Emily, Jamie, thank you so much for joining us. And thanks for everybody who joined online. And what a great conversation. I think we'll definitely be helping some others make a smooth transition into this AI world and help their organizations as well. So thank you very much for joining, and we'll see you on the next webinar.
Thanks for having us,
Thank
Russ.